when people are true to themselves and who they actually want to be and what they want to do, I found that the work product becomes that much better. And it especially shows up, I think, in the interviews when you're meeting with admissions committee members or alumni, because they can suss that out in, 2 minutes if someone is being real or if they're being fake.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 30th episode of Get to Be School. Number 30, you guys. 30 sounds amazing. I did not know how long this was going to go when I started, and this is really fun. That's a lot of conversations with a lot of great people. So thank you for your role in that. Thank you for the connections. Thank you for the support in the show. Please keep doing what you're doing. One great way that you've been supporting the show is by giving feedback. And something that many of you have said is, hey, we want to hear from coaches. We want to hear from experts in the admissions process. So we're going to start dropping in interviews with coaches or AdCom specialists. And today's our first one. Number 30 is our interview with Yash. And Yash, he is a top-rated coach on Leland. He has helped dozens of applicants get into top-rated schools, M7 and more. He's a GSB grad, but he got into Harvard and Stanford. And I think it's a great interview. It really changes the discussion from, the experience at school to more of a, hey, how do we get this thing done? What's going to help you in your application? Or what do you need to be thinking about? And I'm excited for this change. It won't be every week. We'll drop in a couple to begin with and then go back to some students, but we want to start dropping in these amazing coaching episodes. And I think it's a great ad. So thank you for the input as listeners, and thank you to the coaches for your time. If you need to be on the show or you know someone who needs to be on the show, please reach out, please make the connection. And more of you are reaching out for help, for connections, for advice. Keep doing it. This community is just eager to help. So keep reaching out, keep supporting. I've said enough. Let's get to the fun part now with Yash. Yash, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to chat.
This is a fun one for me because it is our first coaching interview. The listeners know we've been interviewing MBAs for a while now, but this is our first transition into more of a different lens. So with that in mind, would you mind introducing yourself to the listeners a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So originally from India, but spent most of my life growing up in Southern California. Ended up going to undergrad at USC in LA, where I studied business and sports media studies. After about 3 years working in a mix of strategy and consulting, first at BCG and then at YouTube, I got my MBA from Stanford. So spent a couple of years up in the Bay for that. Had a really, really great experience. And then now I work full time as an investor at Will Ventures, which is an early stage sports and media venture capital firm, but have been coaching basically for, I guess almost 7 or 8 years now, since I first got into business school, and have really, really enjoyed it.
Awesome. You found the middle of a Venn diagram that many of my friends would kill for. Like sports, VC, strategy is just, you nailed it, man. That's great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
What are some highlights, a few quick highlights from your time at GSB?
Oh man. I mean, what an incredible 2 years. I miss it often, and also I'm now glad that I'm actually in the real world. I think a couple things, I was coming into the GSB sort of directly after COVID. I matriculated fall of 2021. And so, honestly, just the energy of meeting 400 people after being cooped up for a year and a half was just incredible. I remember we did a small sort of class trip to Croatia, not yacht week, but also in Croatia. That was like 25 of us, and some of those people ended up being my closest friends from GSB. So that was a great experience on the social side. And then on the professional side, me and a couple of my classmates, Zach and John, organized the Sports Innovation Conference at the GSB. We actually organized the 10th annual version of it, which was great to see sort of the growth of that conference and be able to sort of meet all the different alumni working in sports in and around the space from GSB. Was awesome.
So great. It's fun to hear about those memories, and that, there's a lot of warm fuzzies from that time. Let's pivot a little bit then to your time at coaching. You've been coaching, you said 8 years?
Yeah. So if actually for some context, so I originally applied to the MBA programs as a preferred MBA candidate. So I applied my senior year of college when I was at USC, and I only applied to Harvard and Stanford because those were the only two schools that offered either the 2+2 / deferred MBA programs. And so I was fortunate enough to get into both, and sort of directly after that started coaching deferred MBA candidates for the 3 years between graduating undergrad and starting at Stanford. Now, once I started at Stanford and actually got a chance to meet my classmates, understood what, the school was looking for in terms of traditional MBA candidates, I started coaching traditional MBA candidates as well. And so that was in 2021. So it's been, about 7 years on the deferred side and about 4 years on the traditional side.
Wow. Okay, there is a lot to learn in almost 8 years of coaching. I'm not asking you to give out your secrets or your main value adds here, but what are some lessons that you've learned in those 8 years?
I think there's a few different lessons. I think the first and foremost is like there is no one size fits all approach, right? And so I'll work a lot with more traditional candidates, folks that are coming from finance or consulting or tech. And, I think the mistake that both candidates and coaches can make is if they've had success with one client or a story has worked well for one client, applying that to a different client. And especially for a school like GSB or HBS that are so competitive, you need to have like a unique story every time. And there really is no framework that works. And so that's the first thing that I've really learned over the years. There's been times where I've worked with clients and try to apply structure that really isn't them. And they end up, going through the application process and I'm almost doing more harm than I'm doing good. And so I think, coming at it from a place of almost starting fresh and coming from a place of humility, I think is really, really important. That's the biggest thing I've learned. The second thing I would say is like every person likes to get coached so differently. And so I've had to adapt my style to just sort of mirror that. I think when I first started as a coach, I had one style and it was like the supportive coach who like was your best friend, right? And I think that works for a lot of people. But others need someone that's a little bit tougher on them and can give critical feedback and is willing to sort of be direct with them. And some people are very structured and others are very unstructured. And so I've sort of adapted my coaching style now over the years to just really meet my clients where they are and sort of try to be as helpful as I can.
Okay, interesting. Walk us through the process. If it is so individualistic, what's your process when you meet a new client? How does that look for you and them?
Totally. Yeah. So honestly, for most clients, the first session is what I call like an intake session, and it feels half like me talking to them as a coach and half of me talking to them as a therapist almost. And it's literally 1 hour of them telling me their life story, starting from their earliest memories to why they want to get an MBA and what they want to do with it. And I think, the reason that I think that's really important is one, I need to fully understand my clients if I'm going to be able to help them, right? I need to understand the good, their best accomplishments, their toughest times, things that might be, a bit of a red flag on their application so that we can work together. And I think that 1 hour session can really create a lot of trust. And then secondly, you would be shocked by the number of times that someone mentions something in passing in that 1 hour session that for them, it's not unique at all. It's just like their life, but I will latch onto that, or I'll notice the theme and 2 or 3 things that they've done. And that really becomes the crux of their narrative and of their story when they're applying. And so I think the beauty in that is that sometimes you don't know what makes you unique and what makes you special. And a coach can really help unlock that. And I found that 1 hour session is just a great way to sort of unlock some of that creativity and get the juices flowing a little bit.
Wow. Okay. Traditionally, is there a timeline that you prefer when working with candidates? 2 weeks, 6 weeks? I know it's not 2 weeks, but
Yeah, honestly, my goal as a coach is like to be able to serve the clients depending on what their needs are, right? So we're about a month away now from round one deadlines for round one of Stanford, right, which is September 9th. And I'm still getting inbounds from folks saying, hey, can you help me with last minute sort of support? And, obviously I want to be able to support them. That's going to look very different. Will probably be a lot more, prescriptive, direct comments and less sort of brainstorming, right? And then there's other clients that are applying for round one that I've been working with since January. And so for them, it's been a much longer process where I've sort of been involved every step of the way from, incubating their essay ideas to brainstorming, who they should choose for their recommenders to, being their sort of buddy when they're going through GMAT or GRE struggles. And so it really depends. I would say if you are sort of looking to apply, say, call it a year from now, give yourself sort of 3 months at least to work with a coach. You would ideally meet with a few different coaches, see who you vibe with, and then start working with them from there on out.
that's great. I was one of these, wait until deadlines are a month away type of people.
Yeah, totally.
And it is a different
Was I, by
experience.
the way. Yeah, totally.
It seems like you run the full experience. I think when a lot of people hear that someone used a coach to get in, they assume it's essay critiquing, but you've already hinted that you kind of offer a full breadth of aid. Can you walk someone through maybe the typical package, so to speak?
Yeah, for sure. Again, this is one where it's like, I think there's sort of the typical package and then there was what actually happens in practice, right? And so I would like to say that my end-to-end packages are pretty much everything but the GMAT or GRE. And that's mostly because, I took the GMAT 7 years ago and the test has changed over the years. And so I think it's important to have a tutor that really understands the GMAT in and out. But anything from sort of application strategy, which schools to apply to, the narrative and topics of your essays, how to choose your recommenders, how to coach your recommenders on writing an effective recommendation, how to actually fill out each part of the application. And then, of course, how to fill out your essays. And then finally, how do you actually prepare for interviews, put your best foot forward in interviews, and in some cases do post-interview assessments as well. That's sort of the end-to-end package. And I would say for each client I support, it's either that end-to-end package or it's something very specific. So for some, it's just essays. For others, it's essays and recommenders. And for some people, they're like, look, I literally want to never talk to you. I want you to look at these 2 essays and give me 1 hour of feedback. And that's all I want. And so it can really range depending on, people's budget and need. But on one end of the spectrum, it's like 1 hour spot coaching for essays. And on the other end, it's more like a 20 to 30 hour package that's a much more like end-to-end support.
Okay. Don't answer this if it's too dumb of a question. But for me, getting a coach now is something I would recommend every single time.
Totally.
Is there ever an instance where someone should not get a coach?
You are like so late to the process that that extra turn is just going to add stress for you, or you're not going to have time to like engage with a coach. I would say it's not worth your time or money to do so. And as a coach, it's my job to meet the clients where they are, but I also need to have sufficient time to process the information they're sharing and make sure, coaching can be expensive and it's a financial thing as well. And so I want to make sure I'm providing good ROI. And so if you don't feel like you can give that time and meet the deadlines that the coach is asking you to, I feel like it's better to sort of not waste your time and money. The other thing I think is like sometimes people will have multiple coaches, and I think that can also get them in trouble where they're getting mixed feedback from different sources. And I think everyone has their own biases as a coach in terms of what they like and what they don't like in an application. And so I do think it's valuable to get multiple perspectives for sure, but I think sort of choose one primary coach because that can sort of really keep it streamlined and keep the feedback consistent.
Okay, interesting. You got into HBS and GSB, incredibly difficult. How much do you have to tailor your help according to the different schools? Do you focus on only helping people who are going to Harvard and Stanford, or do you do everything?
Yeah, so I do everything. I would say like of my clients that I work with, at least 50% of them are applying to one of Harvard or Stanford, if not both. And then probably like 70% of my clients are applying to one of the M7 schools. And then the remaining 30%, are applying to the remainder of the schools. And, you clients are sort of averaging, I would say, anywhere from like 3 to 7 schools that they're applying to. And so, look, as a student, I went through the application process for Harvard and Stanford. So I know those very, very well. But over the years, I've coached clients at getting into every one of the M7 and really T15 schools out there. And so have experience doing it all. I do tailor my advice and my feedback to the school because I think each school is looking for something extremely different. And as an example, like my application for GSB and HBS were extremely different. GSB was much more about being self-aware, at times self-critical, and really understanding my gaps and challenges that I would face in terms of reaching my goals. HBS was the polar opposite of that. It was everything I'd done right. It was all the times I'd been excellent. It came from a place of, like ultimate ambition and sort of long-term high growth ambition. And so it was very different. And I needed to not only change the way I wrote my essays, but I needed to coach my recommenders differently. And the entire tone of the application sort of had to be different amongst those 2 schools. And the same can be said, for any of the M7 schools or the T15 schools that are looking for something different.
That makes sense. And it is difficult. So let's say I'm coming to you and I say, hey, I have 3 schools I want to apply to round 1. We have 6 months to work on these. Is it better to work with one coach for all 3 schools? Or do you want to, in your opinion, would you want to just focus on one with one coach, one with another?
Budget depending, I would probably do one coach for all of them, but I would start with one school. And so typically, as an example, like with my clients, a lot of times Stanford is the first application deadline. I also feel like the Stanford application is a good one to start out with because it is very it causes a lot of self-reflection with the what matters most prompt. And so I would say start with one school, get 1 or 2 essays to a really, really good spot with that coach. And then I think you can apply a lot of those learnings to other schools and other essays. Obviously, you want to tailor things to each specific school, but I think once you've done 1 or 2 schools with a coach, you probably have like 85% of the feedback that you need. And then it's really just about fine tuning those anecdotes and those essays to sort of match the other schools from there. But I would say it's important to sort of have one coach, almost like a primary coach across schools that can help you, adapt your writing and your narrative to each specific school. And then, something I recommend to my clients is like, I, for example, come from the standpoint of someone who has been a student and gone through the application process, right? There's another type of coach that has been an admissions committee member or has actually sat on the panels reading these essays and deciding who gets into those programs. I think it's very valuable to get, sort of a second or third look from some of those folks if you're working with me, for example, to make sure that nothing I'm suggesting is like too off base from what they would want to see from an outcome perspective. I'd like to think at this point, given, how many clients I've worked with, it's probably okay, but I still think sometimes it can be helpful to have a second gut check as well.
You said something there that caught me. Did I understand you correctly that it's better to not run applications in tandem, but to do one, then the next one, then the next one?
Look, I think naturally it's never going to be as clean as like, okay, I'm going to do this school and then this school and this school, especially if there's a lot of overlap in terms of like, recommenders and sending out, transcripts and GMAT scores and all that stuff. So you are going to be working on multiple applications in tandem. What I would say is at least to start, I would start off with one school and focus on that and get back to a really good spot, especially if you're working with a coach, because it allows you to, I think, get the highest ROI on your time with that coach. And then from there, you can use those learnings to other schools. But it also depends on sort of the style of person you are. Sometimes people need to sort of work on different types of essays to get their juices flowing, and they actually prefer some of that chaos to sort of get things across the line. And other times people find it really overwhelming to, if they're applying to 5 schools, 2 or 3 essays each. If they're writing 10 to 15 essays, they prefer to just go school by school in a very systematic way. And so it just depends on the client and sort of how they work.
Okay, yeah. We're going to switch gears a little bit here and just tweak your brain on lessons you've learned. What are common pitfalls you see? And answer that however you can. Maybe it's school specific, but you've coached a lot of kids now, a lot of people. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of school specific stuff. A couple things just to sort of zoom out for a second. The first and I think biggest, red flag or sort of mistakes that I see are people just regurgitating their resume or their accomplishments in their essays. And the whole point of the resume and activity section in the application is to talk about your resume and to talk about your activities. The point of your essays is not to regurgitate those. It's to offer a new perspective that no other part of your application can touch. And so I've found that the clients that are the most successful are those that offer a unique perspective in their essays that prior experiences, their resume, their recommenders don't talk about. And, it's really important to sort of contextualize the application across all the different parts and make sure that each of them serves as something new. That's the first thing. I think the second thing to sort of build off the recommenders point is candidates choosing recommenders that are not appropriate because they either don't know them well enough, they're not willing to write a stellar recommendation, or like the biggest red flag to me, and I hear this all the time, is my clients saying, hey, my recommender said I can write the recommendation for them and then they'll edit it. And I think that's like the biggest pitfall, because to me that shows that that person is not even willing to carve out an hour and a half or 2 hours of their time to write a strong letter of recommendation, and they want you to do the legwork. I think it's very important to prep your recommenders with bullets and give them as much sort of information as you can, but it should be on them to write the recommendation. And I think every time I sort of hear from a client that someone doesn't want to write the letter of recommendation, they just want the candidate to write it for them, I think that's a really big red flag. And so being very strategic about what recommenders you choose, I think is very, very important. And then the third pitfall that I see, and I would say this is less common, but I think it definitely comes up enough, a lack of consistency in the application. And so if everything you've done in your experiences is in finance, for example, and now you're sort of saying you want to go work in an operational capacity, but you don't really talk about why that is, or you don't really give any more insight into your thought process, like that can almost come across as disingenuous. And so I think it's really important to sort of be consistent in your narrative and make sure your experiences, your ambitions, and sort of your motivations all tie together as cleanly as possible.
Okay, so make sure each part of the application is different. Don't regurgitate the resume, and then choose the right recommender. I love that what you said about, I don't know, if they are just asking for you to give them kind of the bulk of it, and then they're going to work from there. That's solid. Because I think a lot of us think we're just doing them a favor. We're trying to do the most for them because we're asking something so heavy. That's a bold piece of advice and a good one. And then a lack of consistency in the app. That's incredibly helpful. Maybe the last question is the flip side of that. What are some just really positive things you've seen repeat themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the number one thing is just like people who are very honest about who they are in these applications. And like, they're not trying to be someone they're not, and they're not, painting a picture that's rosier or, less rosy than what is the reality. One thing that I thought, I did really well when I was applying to Stanford, and I've, reread my What Matters Most essay a number of times, especially working with clients. Like, it was a very simple narrative, and it was very true to me. My What Matters Most essay for Stanford was about using sports to bring people together. And that's, quite literally what I'm doing now with my career. And if you asked 10 of my friends, like, what matters most to Yash, all 10 of them would say sports. And so I knew that if I had not gone into Stanford, that it would have been okay because I had put forward an authentic representation of who I was as a person. If I had gotten in and I had put, something that wasn't true, I honestly would have felt more guilty than if I hadn't gotten in because I would have gotten in with something that's disingenuous, right? And so I think the number one thing, and it's crazy how it shows up in your writing and your recommendations, like when people are true to themselves and who they actually want to be and what they want to do, I found that the work product becomes that much better. And it especially shows up, I think, in the interviews when you're meeting with admissions committee members or alumni, because they can suss that out in, 2 minutes if someone is being real or if they're being fake. And look, I think a lot of folks coming from more traditional backgrounds fall prey to this because they're trying to be too unique or, step out of like the cardboard box around I'm a consultant or I'm working in investment banking or private equity. And they sort of over rotate and do too much. And so, I think the candidates that are the most successful, even from a traditional candidate perspective, are those that are honest with themselves and stay true to sort of who they are and who they want to be in the application.
I think that is something that requires some serious, obviously honesty, but also courage,
Totally.
if I can say courage. Like,
Totally.
Josh, I think this was incredibly helpful. Where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So for coaching, I do it through Leland. So you can find my coaching profile on there. They're a great platform that I've really enjoyed working with. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn as well. Always happy to sort of chat and give advice, even if it's not in a coaching capacity. You just want to hear about my MBA experiences or what I liked about GSB or how I chose between schools. Like, always happy to chat. I personally didn't have a lot of help when I was going through the process. And so, my goal is to sort of demystify it as much as I can and just sort of be there for people. Whether you want to pay for coaching and I can be helpful there, great. But if you just want even more of an informational call, always happy to do that as well.
I can attest to that. You responded so genuinely and so quickly when I, out of the blue, reached out. You were so good about coming on the show.
Well, no, I appreciate it. And thanks for what you're doing in terms of educating people and making sure that, we're lowering the barrier of understanding what it takes to get an MBA and get into school. So I appreciate what you're doing and all the stuff you're putting out.
So nice of you. Josh, thank you for coming on the show, man. Hope we chat again soon.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I'm very curious how that came up in in conversation, but maybe a story for another day.